and thank you to all my subscribers for coming back and supporting the channel. And if you're new here, welcome. For second grade, we will be studying U.S. history, and we are starting off with the discovery of the Americas. So let's get into it. This book list will have history books. I'm also going to share some geography books and one or two books about poems. These are all things we'll be reading for the first month of school. The first book is called The Discovery of the Americas, and I really enjoyed this book. It is a no-nonsense book about the discovery of not only North America, but South America as well. Of course, it talks about the discovery of what is now the United States, but first they talk about how people migrated into North and South America. So if you haven't studied about that yet, you can learn about that. And this is really a no BS type of book. It really just has the facts of how North America was discovered, and that's something that I appreciate. So it starts off with native people in both North and South America. It shows you some examples of things that they created, and it shows how things that were found on the eastern part of the world were also found on the western part of the world, and the similarities between the cultures and the continents. And it continues on to talk about Vikings and the Viking settlements, and then it starts talking about Europeans finding North America, Canada, and the United States. And it does talk about Christopher Columbus and how he sailed to find the Caribbean and the North America continent. And then it also goes on and it talks about Amerigo Vespucci, the Italian explorer, and it talks about Vasco Nunez de Balboa, who found Central America. And it also talks about Ferdinand Magellan, and let's see, I think that's about it. It also talks about Juan Sebastian Elcano. So I don't think that we will get all the way through all those explorers, but we will go up to Columbus finding North America. Here's another book called How We Learned the Earth is Round, and I think this is a good book to talk about, kind of important. It goes along with why explorers set out to find other land and the things that people used to believe. Some people thought the earth was flat, but these explorers went out and they wanted to prove that the earth was actually round. And so the book also explains why the earth looks flat, but that it is actually round. And so I think that's kind of a question that children have, and so I thought that was important to add in. And I thought that this book did a really good job of answering a lot of questions. This is another book called Who Was First? Discovering the Americas by Russell Friedman. This book is not really geared towards second graders, I would say. This is more like fourth grade level reading, but I do feel like this book had really good information in it, and you can read portions of it to a second grader. They would understand it, and also I think as a parent you could read this and give them the information that you learned from this book. But here's a table of contents. It does go through what happened before Columbus arrived, Columbus, if China ever discovered America. They talk about Leif the Lucky. They call this the not so new world because actually there were many people who were in North and South America before Leif the Lucky or Columbus came. And then it talks about who really discovered America. And I found this book to be very interesting. Let me show you a couple of the pages. So there's some black and white, and there's some color paintings. So again, this is something that would really be more of a discussion between you and your second grader. But the book brings up some deep thinking type of questions, and I thought it was well done. Now, because we are starting off with the discovery of the Americas, and the Native Americans were in North America when it was discovered, we are going to start off talking about Native Americans. So I will be going through second grade in a chronological order, starting off with Native Americans, then talking about pilgrims and explorers, and then settlers, and so forth. So as for Native Americans, I got this book called A Kid's Guide to Native American History, and it includes more than 50 activities. This book is really well done. It is quite thick. Again, this is something that the parent would read and you would do the activities with your child. This is not like a book just for second graders. It's a book for all ages, really. And I thought they did an excellent job. The authors did a lot of research on different Native people. Let me see if I can find the table of contents. So the table of contents goes through who are Native people, and it goes through regions of the United States, and then it talks about the different tribes in those regions. And what I really like about it is that for each section that you read about, they have a really cool activity that can go along with it. And so there's 50 different activities, so you can choose from whatever activities you like. This is great if you need ideas, you don't have time to look stuff up online. I will definitely be using this as a resource. The next book is called Corn is Maize, The Gift of the Indians, and it is a Read and Find Out Science Stage 2 book, and I really enjoy these type of books. They do such a great job, but this one is all about corn, and it's about where corn came from because scientists had a hard time figuring out where corn came from. It is a grain that was like no other grain. And for the ancient people or people that came before us, it was a mystery. And so anyways, this talks about corn and how corn is grown and the cycle of corn. And it talks about Native people and people of South America and how they learned how to grow corn. And it really does talk about the different types of grain, how corn is different from that, and really how corn came to be. So this is page 15, and this is where they talk about it. And ancient corn was called teosinte. It was a different type of plant, and this plant mixed with other plants, and then corn was created. And so this was created in South America, and then the corn was spread from South America to North America, and then once the pilgrims landed, Europeans learned about it, and then corn was like spread all over the world. And so it's a very interesting book. It tells you why corn was such a vital part of not only Native people and South American lives, but also the pilgrims, because corn saved the pilgrims' life the first year that they landed in North America. The next book is called Seasons of the Circle, A Native American Year. And I thought this one was really beautifully done. I like the illustrations, but it goes through each month. And each month it has like a short little description of what Native people would do during the year, how they prepared for winter, how they prepared for springtime, and all the different things that they would have to do in their daily life. I thought this was very good. The next book is called Drawing America, Pocahontas, Princess of the River Tribes. And I really like this one because this one is really geared towards younger readers, second graders, and it talks about Pocahontas. So I'm talking about Pocahontas now because in the video following this one, we will start talking about when Europeans came and landed in the Americas. So this is kind of like a, what do you call it, a preface for that. So we're going to be talking about Pocahontas, but this is the only book in this video about Pocahontas. And so anyway, this book talks about her as a young girl. I like that it starts off where she's a young girl. I think kids can identify with that. And that she was a princess and her life as a princess, and that people really respected her, and she was an important part of the tribe. And it talks about things that their tribe would do, And then it also talks about when the Europeans come and Pocahontas learns about them, and she's a little bit afraid, but she's also a very, very curious person, and she wants to meet them. And then her father, the chief of the Powhatans, he was going to, I think, kill John Smith, and Pocahontas saves his life. It shows that she's a very empathetic person, and she wanted to be kind to the newcomers. And so then it shows how she helps the settlers, and she becomes friends with John Smith, and he tells her about England, and he learns the Powhatan language, and she begins to learn how to speak English. And then at the back it shows you how to draw some of the people, but I think it's pretty advanced. I think this would be way too difficult for a second grader. It would probably even be difficult for an adult. It's a very advanced, but if your kids are really into art, they might enjoy that. The next book is called People of the Breaking Day, written and illustrated by Marcia Sewall. This one is about the Wampano people, and so I wanted to read her a book about the Wampano people because, again, in the coming months, we'll be talking about the Wampano people and the Pilgrims, and so I thought this was a really good book. But it talks all about the Wampano life, who they were, their beliefs, the type of work that they did. Yeah, and I thought it was really nicely written in somewhat of a story form. The next book is called Grand Canyon by Jason Chin, and it's all about the Grand Canyon. So this kind of is going into the geography books, and we visited the Grand Canyon a few years ago, and it was really amazing to see. And so I wanted to bring in this book, have my daughter learn a little bit more about the Grand Canyon, kind of bring back those good memories of our trip to the Grand Canyon. Unfortunately, when we went, we did not go down into the canyon and walk through the canyon. Would have loved to have done that, but we just weren't up for it. My daughter was much smaller then, but hopefully one day in the future, at least she can try to go hiking through the Grand Canyon. But this is a beautifully done book. Lots of information, talks a lot about geology and the ecosystem of the Grand Canyon. And if you've never been to the Grand Canyon, it is a place where you go and you can just admire the beauty. It's a place where people, they get there and they see it, and it's actually very quiet there because people are just really in awe of how beautiful the Grand Canyon is. And I think this book really brings that out. It does talk about the history of the Grand Canyon, how old the Grand Canyon is, how the Grand Canyon was created, animals that live there. So very nice. Next book is called Wish You Were Here, Emily's Guide to the 50 States. It's by Kathleen Krull, and it is a book about a little girl who goes on a road trip all across the United States with her grandma. And in the beginning of the book, it has the table of contents and all the different states you can look up. And then it also has a map of the United States. And basically, it just goes through state by state, giving you some information about the state and the things that the girl and her grandma liked about each state. So just very nice if you just need a really brief blurb about each state. Each state only covers 1 to 2 pages. The next book is called My America, a Poetry Atlas of the United States. I thought this was a really interesting book. Very well done. It is a book of poetry, but it's also an atlas. And so if you go to the table of contents, it shows the United States by region. So whatever region you're working on, you can flip to that area. I really appreciate that. And then each region, it shows what states are in that region, and then they pick a few states and then they have a poem about that state. So this one is about Maine, and some of the poems are really good and other poems I'm not so impressed by, but overall I thought this was a good book. And if you need a book about poetry, you can use this one. You learn a little bit about geography and a little bit about poetry. The next book is called Ocean Soup Tide Pool Poems. So I only have 2 books on poems that we'll be reading, but each month I want to introduce my daughter to some poems. This one is about the ocean. So because we usually start school at the end of July, beginning of August, it's still hot. It's still ocean time, beach time. So I thought a book of poems about the ocean or the beach would be great. I like this one. I think it's very child friendly, the illustrations and the poems, and they're just fun. Some of them are funny, and so I think she'll really like that. The next 2 books are about inventors and inventions. So each month I will be discussing with her about an American inventor and also just about inventions in general. I think it's good for her to learn what inventions are, how people think of inventions. So the first book is Invented by Animals, and I thought this book was so fun and so well done. The table of contents shows all the animals that they're talking about. So octopus, blue morpho butterfly, shark, eagle, gecko, seahorse, paper wasp, tree frog, earwig, jumbo squid, spider, and so on. And all of the inventions that were inspired by these animals. And so one that sticks out in my mind was that they studied sharks. And because they studied sharks and how sharks' skin and texture was, they were able to come up with the wetsuit and the bathing suit. And I thought that was so interesting. I know my daughter will love this book. And my favorite book out of all was called Ice Cream Man, and it is by Glenda Armand and Kim Freeman, illustrated by Keith Mallett. And this is a true story. It is a book about a man called Augustus Jackson and how he helped improve ice cream. And so this book, it's so good. It talks in the beginning about Augustus Jackson as an adult, and he sings a song about ice cream. And so he's out on the street with his ice cream cart, calling all the children and all the people to come buy some ice cream. And so as he's giving ice cream, he goes down memory lane, and he thinks about how it all started. And it talks about how he was born free. He lived in Pennsylvania, and he was born a free person, but people in the South were still slaves. And even though he was free, his family was very poor, and so they had to garden and they had to make things on their own, and they cooked on their own. And his mother taught him how to cook, and he actually became the best cook in his family. And his family would tell him, "Oh my goodness, you could cook for a living." And that gave him this idea, like, yeah, I think I do want to be a chef. I think that's what I'll do. And so at 12 years old, he sets out with, I believe, some family members, and he goes to Washington, D.C. And when he gets to Washington, D.C., he goes right to the White House and decides that that's where he's going to work. And he meets a woman named Jenny, who is a slave, actually. And she takes him in, and she tells him if he does a good job, she'll teach him how to be a cook. And so talks about his life living at the White House and helping Jenny and her staff prepare food for the presidents of the White House and their guests. And eventually, when he turns, I believe, 17 years old, he becomes a cook, and his job is to do desserts. And he becomes an expert at making ice cream. But ice cream back in the day was not the ice cream of today. And so they would have really weird flavors like asparagus. And it was quite different because they would use eggs to make ice cream. Anyhow, so he made ice cream. Everybody loved it. But he had in his mind, he would feed people and they would smile because they liked the ice cream so much. But he thought, why shouldn't everyone smile? Why can't everybody enjoy ice cream? Because back then, only wealthy people were afforded the luxury of ice cream. And so he told Miss Jenny that, his time there was over and he's moving on, going back to Pennsylvania, and he's going to open an ice cream shop. And that is exactly what he did. And his nickname, I believe, was Gus. So his ice cream shop was called Gus's Ice Cream Parlor. And people from all over came to check out what ice cream was, and he invented different new flavors. So strawberry, chocolate, mint, vanilla, things that we're very familiar with now. And he also had a cart, and he would go out on the street with his cart singing a song to bring the children and people to come buy the ice cream, and everybody absolutely loved the ice cream. Word spread quickly, and so he realized that he needed to figure out how to make more ice cream and make it faster. And other people started opening up ice cream shops because they had learned how to make ice cream, and he thought, maybe I'll sell my ice cream to the other shop owners. And so that's what he did. And after he started selling to the shop owners, he wanted to make even more ice cream so that he could send it out of state. And so he figured out a way to keep his ice cream cold so they could send it out of state. And he used rock salt to do that. And so then he started shipping his ice cream to New York, and the rest is history. And it was just such a good book. I loved it, my favorite. And then the best part is at the end, it shows you a recipe for how to make your own ice cream at home, but you do have to use rock salt. And I'm not sure what rock salt is, and I don't know where you can buy it, but I'll try to find it. But if we can't make our own ice cream at home, we'll probably go out and enjoy some ice cream. And also, the other thing that I liked about it is at the very end, it gives some additional information about Augustus Jackson and his life. And then as a bonus, I just wanted to talk about a couple of things. So I will be using this Native American dwellings house. It talks about wigwams, longhouses, and other forms of houses. And this one is called North American Indian Crafts. And it just talks about all of the different ingenuity, the things that Native people created. And so I'll just flip through here. It's a coloring book, but it has little bits of information at the bottom that you would read to your child. And I just thought this was really good. This was just like an extra supplemental thing. If you want to talk about home structures or Native American ingenuity and all of the things that they were able to create from nature. And speaking of ingenuity, I wanted to talk about this book, Indigenous Ingenuity. This was an excellent book. It is not for second graders. It is definitely more of an adult read. It was in the juvenile section of my library, so maybe upper middle school, high schoolers could read it. But definitely the parents can use this as a guide. I really enjoyed the introduction of this book, but it also talks about sustainability and ecology, transportation, the way they communicated, agriculture and food, health science, different medicines that they used, textile, technology, fashion. I mentioned before that my daughter is interested in fashion, so we might talk about that. They talk about hair extensions, guys, and just all kinds of stuff. Architecture, civil engineering, mathematics. They did mathematics. Just very interesting book. The authors, Deidre Haverlock and Edward Kay, they did a very thorough job at researching and writing this. I did not read through the whole thing, but like I said, I did read the introduction and I did read portions of the book. Thought it was very well done. At the back of the book, they have a list of sources that they use, so you can go and check out those books. They also have websites and museums that you could check out. So you could definitely use this as a guide, or you could use some of the information in here to teach your children, especially if you have older kids and you guys are doing like a family unit. Okay, well, I hope that you guys enjoyed this book list. I'm gonna leave you with The Ice Cream Man because this was my favorite book, but I hope that you guys enjoyed this book list, that you can use some of these books in your learning, and I will see you in the next video.